Right. Now that it's close to the end of the season, now's as good a time as any to go over the identities of it. Okay, to put this into context, I'll do a summary of Heathcliff's background story, as it's needed for this to make sense, considering what was in the end of Chapter 6. Yes, something that will provide a frame of reference for the identities, where the divergence point might be. Heathcliff's story began in the monochrome back streets of District 20, where one winter he was without a home and outside in the middle of winter. He would have perished that winter if it weren't for Mr. Earnshaw taking pity on him and bringing him into Wuthering Heights, while his son Hindley was against this idea. Catherine quite liked Heathcliff. Hindley made sure that Heathcliff didn't sit by the fire and regularly beat him, while Heathcliff taunted him that one day he might be sitting by the fire, and that Mr. Earnshaw saw Heathcliff as his son rather than Hindley. Catherine grew to like Heathcliff, and she came up with riddles as she wanted Heathcliff to solve them, and when he did solve them, she came up with a more convoluted answer for him to figure out. These days continued, until Heathcliff and Catherine was late coming in, and they decided to investigate the Edgar estates. This led to Catherine being bitten by a mutant guard dog, where she first met Linton Edgar and his sister Isabella and stayed there, while Heathcliff was sent back to Wuthering Heights, where Hindley ordered Nellie to neglect his care more than usual. Nellie being the chief butler. This ranged from denying him food, locking him out of the manor, and even outside the gates. Josephine was especially hostile towards Heathcliff. When Catherine returned after that, Heathcliff denied her, and whenever Hindley and Linton worked together to provoke Heathcliff, they had him locked up in the attic. The years passed with the physical and psychological abuse continuing. He endured this only because Catherine kept him there. But then, one day, as he overheard a conversation between Catherine and Nellie, saying that she intends to marry Linton for his wealth in order to become a great inventor, and that marrying Heathcliff would degrade her and leave them both destitute. This broke Heathcliff's heart, seeing that there was nothing for him there anymore. He left Wuthering Heights, vowing never to return, until he became someone that mattered. This would have an effect on Catherine as well, as she wouldn't leave her room. Nellie was also conspiring against her, working with Encorn, providing a mirror shard to her, where she interacted with a number of different Catherine variants, much as Nellie interacted with variants of herself, as she examined the device herself. And 3 years after Heathcliff left, Catherine came to the conclusion that she needed to erase herself from existence. She then decided to marry Linton and put together a plan, where it involves having him acquire a golden bar, have N-Corp set up a lab in the basement, and put her in a coffin. She had Nellie send an invite to Heathcliff, who, unknown to her, was burning the letters that he sent her, claiming not to have received any. Meanwhile, Heathcliff joined the vigilante syndicate known as the Dead Rabbits, led by Matthew, although at some point before he joined the Damned Dozen, they were wiped out. Yes. Before they were wiped out, he left that syndicate and encountered Faust, who recruited him into Limbus Company. That would eventually lead him to join what would become what I would refer to as the Damned Dozen. And not just because Dirty Dozen is taken. Upon dying for the first time in District 4 and being brought back to life by Dante, this was officially setting the scene for what was to come in the following months. After some initial difficulties, he had many adventures with those he fought alongside. He fought the wing remnants of District 4, the syndicates of District 10, the psychotic zealots of Encore, the wronged restaurant owner and the corporate powers of District 11, the deranged captain in District 21, the monsters of the outskirts in his pursuit of cloves, until he encountered a dangerous warrior that was taken by the library in his home district of District 20, when he knew that his group therapy session was near. His arrival was not warmly welcomed. Not warmly received either. Well, except perhaps by Nelly. Those present disregarded him at best and were outright insulting at worst. He found out during an Orifi will reading that Wuthering Heights was left to Linton, a Golden Bower was left to himself, and a trip to the M-Corp loony bin was left for Hindley. Heathcliff was pained by hearing of Catherine's death, and then he and the Damned Dozen found themselves in a different part of Wuthering Heights. He saved Hindley from Josephine and the Wuthering Heights butlers, who was not grateful for this. They then headed to Catherine's room and found Linton's butlers searching it. After beating them into submission, they found out that the diary was hidden there. Thankfully, Heathcliff knew that it was hidden in a pillow. Using it, they knew to go to a fireplace in the dining hall. The way to the basement was there. Linton was there waiting for them. After verbally abusing and insulting Heathcliff, he found out that Catherine felt strongest for Heathcliff and he was just a backup. This disheartened him, and he let Dante and the Damned Dozen down into the basement, where they fought Pekatula on the way down. They found a lab that was disturbingly familiar to Yi Sang. They also encountered another of the former League of Nine there, Arcia, who was under N-Corp's employ. As for the Orifi fixers, they were actually former Ring researchers. After they were killed, except for Arcia, Hindley, Matthew and the dead rabbits appeared and the two groups fought. After more of the dead rabbits were killed by the Damned Dozen, except Matthew, Hindley decided to fight personally. The slightly more durable punching bag was defeated, and then he distorted into a lupine form. But even that wasn't enough to take down Heathcliff and the others. Heathcliff then decided to put Hindley out of his misery. Yes, a mercy killing, as he had suffered enough. After that, Matthew was revealed to be a psychotic variant of Heathcliff, whom they fought with what was left of the dead rabbits. Heathcliff then used his body sack EGO to finish him off. After that, he saw how this variant of himself became what he was, with the death of Catherine, finding out that it wasn't slow. This was the start of his mission to hunt down all variants of himself throughout the multiverse. Carmen then broke Heathcliff by exploiting his insecurities, resulting in him distorting into his own lupine form, which proceeded to rampage through the lab. forcing the others to subdue him, which they did, after he was reminded of a time when he and Catherine were happy. Then they had Linton and his butlers to deal with. Apparently Heathcliff was supposed to be the sacrifice for what was to happen. Those butlers were all killed after they tried to rectify this. And after Linton believed that Catherine loved him, he sacrificed himself to become the doe. Yes, Linton became the raw genetic material for summoning a stable identity, which turned out to be Earl King Heathcliff, the identity that they fought previously, who then proceeded to kill Josephine, although in that case it was self-defense as she intended to try and kill him. And he summoned the Wild Hunts, an army of undead variants of Hindley, both human and distorted, Josephine and Linton, along with distortions. No, not distortions, as that's Hindley. Pekatula, including a stage 3 that had never been previously encountered. The damned dozen force a seemingly endless tide of them, until Virgilius, the Red Gaze, personally intervened, seeing as this lab was similar to what he encountered in District 14 over a year ago. Which was why he was working for Limbus Company in the first place. Knowing that this intervention would bite him in the later, he distracted the majority of the Wild Hunt, allowing the others to catch up to Earl King Heathcliff. With the help of Dante generating localized time dilation fields, which they realized that they could do that. They caught up to Earl King Heathcliff, and then Mersault used his EGO to bind him long enough for other restraints to be used, after the others beat him into submission. They then realised that the one helping Earl King Heathcliff from behind the scenes, one that shouldn't know that the dead rabbits were dangerous with red eyes in the back streets, due to colour not being in the back streets, and shouldn't know that they were looking for the golden bar, was Nelly, the turncoat, then freed Earl King Heathcliff, who then went to the rooftop. As for Nelly's reason for the betrayal, which she disputed as that implies that she was on Heathcliff's side in the first place, it was because Heathcliff and Catherine were too indecisive, and that if she didn't do anything about it, she'd be dragged down with them. They then fought each other, and Nelly was defeated. She believed that it was already over, and Heathcliff saw that she had a point. Then she and the others saw that Heathcliff disappeared from view, where he found himself at a point where he overheard the conversation that led him to leave. Then he found out that she wanted to help him to be better, which was why she wanted to marry Linton. He decided to do what he should have done years ago and told her that he made a mistake and wanted to fix what could be fixed. After that realization, he reappeared and decided to finish what he started, despite Nelly's best efforts to discourage him. He climbed up to the rooftop with the others and told Earl King Heathcliff that he and Nelly had the same information as him, but interpreted it wrong. That if they just waited a little to hear Catherine out, it could have been different. He refused to accept this. Then Heathcliff decided to stab himself with the golden bar in an attempt to ruin the plan. It didn't work. the golden bar returned to the rooftop, where it was used as a lightning rod to summon all Catherine variants into that universe, which led to a battle where the Damned Dozen alternated between fighting Earl King Heathcliff and the Gestalts of the Catherine variants, those that have lost their Heathcliffs. Dante realised that this battle with Earl King Heathcliff was far from conclusive. If he won, he'd continue to hunt down other variants, and this would leave the Catherines in despair. Then their diary received messages. It was from the Catherine of their universe. This allowed Heathcliff to say what he should have told her years ago. And it also demonstrated the immense power of the golden bars to warp reality, which showed how dangerous they were. It allowed Catherine to be erased by Dante. All of them. At least, in theory, she and other variants of her were erased from existence. While some things didn't change, such as Mr. Earnshaw finding Heathcliff and bringing him to Wuthering Heights, without Catherine being there, he left much sooner. Then, just before Earl King Heathcliff was sent back to his world, considering that the reason for him being in that universe was no longer there, a world where Heathcliff and Catherine were at peace were shown. Only Dante, Heathcliff, and later revealed Demian were aware of the changes. All the others were no longer able to remember Catherine, who was dead in the coffin, which implied that in some worlds, Catherine's existence was not erased, but all memory of her was, which explains why they're not in the branch facility to get the golden bar. Nellie, meanwhile, after Heathcliff, who was at least on paper the master of Wuthering Heights by default, due to the other two parties in the will being dead, freed her from his service. Stole the golden bar that wasn't drained of power back to go to Encore. Yes, confusing kindness for weakness. While Dante was healing and reviving the others, Heathcliff understanding that the next time that they meet, it will not be in friendly terms. He now had a new goal, to restore his Catherine's existence, hopeful that the golden bars can do that. Meanwhile, he would fight for Limbus Company and assist the others with their own unfinished business. Well, at least those that haven't already resolved it yet. Right, now that we've got that taken care of, more identities appeared for Gregor, Rodion, Emil Sinclair, Yisang, and Ishmael in Chapter 6, and in Chapter 6.5. I can't go over Heathcliff's before I cover those, so let's start with them. First we have Edgar family heir Gregor. Gregor found that there was things in that world that one could never grow accustomed to. The bizarre tang of the dregs, a broken piece of tea leaves from the last fill of the teacup from the pot, the disappointing flavour of lukewarm Scotch whisky, diluted from melted ice, and the most hated taste of nightmares that continue to haunt him. In that, he was visited by one that he hates the most, the beast that took his little sister and destroyed his family, referring to him as the cunning, cruel wolf, who took so much from him that he couldn't even recall all that he deprived him of. The one that took his arm and left him to wear a prosthetic. which he saw as shameful and hateful, seeing the one that took his arm, but not his life, as a wretch. Seeking death to him was an act of mercy that was denied. In the nightmare, he never arrived alone. He was beset by foes on all sides with no hope of rescue. He asked if this was how bad his fear was, a body born weak and ailing, that forces him to struggle that much just to survive those that sought to harm him. He couldn't overcome this fear. He aimed with his pointy saber, stabbing them all with gloom-tempered swordplay that he was trained his entire life in. But it ends with defeat, a victorious conclusion distant and unreachable. He came to an understanding after that. He was the robbed one, where even the chance to struggle was deprived him. He woke up. He struggled to at least better manage his weak composition. He couldn't live in his parents' glory. The vultures were all circling him to take his wealth. He didn't want to appear weak, so he trained his body and in the use of the blade. The pain in his lungs was too familiar to him. Determination meaningless to his weak body. A cruel fate is how he protects what's his. A good home, quality clothes, delectable food, his inheritance. He even once believed that he had overcome what he was born with, but something slipped his mind. The vagabond that he saw at Wuthering Heights, the resentful eyes of an ill-tempered vagrant, burning with hatred behind his wet, ragged hair. This was the Heathcliff of that world that appeared before him. As he was drunk on delusion, he saw his fear reflected in his eyes, that he's there to take everything that he had. He cut off his arm before he could react. Gregor did not want to be reminded of this. It made his stump ache. He felt acid reflux go up his throat. He wouldn't be defeated, seeing Heathcliff as playing a game of hide and seek, swearing that he'll have it. To sever that terrifying nightmare, the wolven hunt will begin, because as long as he lives, he'll never be free of the horror. He had to slay him with his own hands. It would appear that Gregor in this world has been swapped with Linton. He has the ill health and the hostility towards this world's Heathcliff. Although in this case he had good reasons to be hostile towards him as, well, he cut off his arm, which hinted that Gregor might not have been born without an organic arm, where it should be. That in all those worlds he either lost it due to an accident in battle or had it deliberately cut off, which caused him to have nightmares repeatedly due to the traumatic experience. As for how he was in that family, it might be possible that the Linton of that world was stillborn and Gregor was replaced by him, by Mr. Edgar. As for that world's Heathcliff, he's clearly about as messed up as Earl King Heathcliff, if not worse, as he cut off Gregor's arm, likely being the cause of him fleeing Wuthering Heights. Regardless of if this was before or after the altercation, rather the alteration of the timeline in that universe, due to this being a criminal act, and it's clear that this Heathcliff wants vengeance for the torment that was caused by Gregor and others. It makes me question, could he and Linton, whom he was role swapped with, could he have had his lungs cloned with modified genes to make them less defective? If this was genetic, or medical treatment if it was disease-based, or worst case scenario, could he have had them replaced with prosthetics? Either they didn't think of this, or that kind of medical treatment or prosthetics was in short supply in District 20, as it certainly was not a money issue that's stopping him from getting either. Next we have T-Corp Class 2 Collection staff Rodion. In a restaurant somewhere in the nest of District 20, the Class 3 collection staff member known as Don Quixote was pleased about the glorious piece of steak, practically dripping with juice, cheerfully chomping a mouthful of it, savouring the flavour. A Class 2 collection staff member saw that place as great for lunch. He happily wiped his mouth with a napkin. It was nothing short of delicious, based on how the others reacted. Rodion thought, well, let's just say that she was glaring at a piece of steak on the tip of her fork as though it wasn't even food. She wasn't in the mood for food and wasn't in the mood to bite into it, as it was in the sickly yellow-brown colour that her colour-drained surroundings were. They didn't excite her taste buds. All the sepia monochrome did was inspire disgust. Her repulsed expression made that clear. After staring and poking half-heartedly at the piece of steak, she let out a deep sigh and put down her fork. Don Quixote noticed this and asked what was wrong. Rodion dismissed this as unimportant, telling her that she didn't have the appetite that day. Don Quixote saw this as quite a problem, attributing this as due to work-related stress, which was why they chose that delicious meal in that place. She then told them to raise their wine glasses for a toast. Rodion asked if they should do this now, as it's only midday. Don Quixote saw that a dash of alcohol in her might help with work efficiency. No, Don Quixote, it might make her do something stupid. One thing is clear with all the variants of Rodion so far is that they can be unrestrained sober. The Class 2 collection staff member agreed with Don Quixote. They don't have a lot of chances to go out for something like this. Which wasn't wrong, as T-Corp employees of different classes rarely dine together, due to all living varying hours in a given day, likely due to different pay. Most prefer to dine with those living in similar timescales, to dine together without making each other comfortable. They had to go to a restaurant under the TT4 protocol, which was usually out of the budget ranges of low-ranking staff members. They chose a place that served colourless food to save a little money while indulging in as much as they can afford to. The restaurant was more affordable due to it being not adorned with expensive colour-returning lamps. Rodion reluctantly went through with the toast with the wine that looks like the urine of someone that needed medical consultation, largely because she didn't want to ruin the cheery mood, even though the wine disgusted her. She tried to hide her disgust, even though it took a lot to maintain that illusion that everything was fine. She then rose from her seat. She didn't touch her food. The other Class 2 staff member asked if she was leaving already. She told them that it was the illegal inventions crackdown period. She had to get back to work or she won't make her quota. Don Quixote did hear that they've been redoubling their regulation enforcement efforts, advising her not to overwork herself. Rodion hoped to get a promotion soon. She departed that restaurant for the back streets, a path that was close to the nest, considering that it was still sepia monochrome. On that day, she was there to conduct an on-site report verification. Contacting the Technology Administration Agency with her findings and retrieving any and all unregistered inventions. She told those that invented them that all will be confiscated, and as for the fines, according to the updated manuals, it's 8 hours for each item, which adds up to 40 hours. So, 5 unregistered inventions, demanding that they cough it up. The Backstreet's inventor asked her if it was 7 hours last time. Rodion claimed that the higher-ups raised the fines and tax rates in general, asking if they want to take it to the collections office and go through each and every single one of the items. Was that what they wanted? They didn't. The truth was, the time tax rates weren't changed. She was just giving him an inflated rate to skim a little off the top for her personal use. Embezzlement being a common practice among the lower-ranking underpaid collection staff at T-Corp, fining people more than they owe and take the surplus for themselves. Most citizens of District 20 know this, but simply allow this to happen as they don't want to risk getting on the collector's bad side, which usually causes more problems than it solves. Rodion told him that he should consider himself lucky. Others would have tried to rip him off for 10 hours per item. Or something similar that's ridiculous. The inventor tried to get to his timepiece. Rodion told him hands off it, quickly stopping him from reaching to the one on his waist. Even the time-rich can't immediately make use of the abundance of time that they have within the same day. But if they've already readied and stored enough time the day before, they can accelerate themselves merely by touching their timepieces. But that's what he wanted her to think. It wasn't the watch he was going for. It was a tool, one that the inventor was going to attack her with, telling her to sod off. He hadn't got time to spare for one of those collectors. Not one like her. This was a signal as people holding all kinds of construction equipment were slowly emerging from the alleyways of the back streets. It's clear that he wasn't going to pay regardless. Rodion noting that he seems popular. The inventor made it clear that if she takes 40 hours from him, he'll be living 4-hour days for an entire week. He didn't see that as living. Rodion told him that you should be grateful that the 4-hour policy even exists. She flinched as they surrounded her, but she regained her composure and slowly started turning the clockwork on her watch. This caused her body to shimmer with after-images. This caused her to accelerate herself. Once she depletes all the time that's assigned to her for that mission, she'll need to use her own time. She's decided to use that anyway to deal with this hostile reception, even though she didn't want to waste time on them. She didn't have a choice, since they threatened her with violence. Any response that she didn't get was too slow for her to understand. They swung their weapons at her, but it was pointless. Condensed time, even for a brief moment, from their perspective, was more than enough to casually avoid their sluggish, wild swings. Her relative speed made them go to brown alerts. Even though they couldn't hear her, she had to say what she had to, that she'll make them pay dearly for wasting her time, implying that she'll do more than just increase the time tax fine by more than 40 hours. This variant of Rodion clearly sold out as she was employed by T-Corp as a combination of local law enforcement and a taxwoman. The main version of Rodion lost her appetite after a few days in the nest of District 20. Imagine this variant living in a sepia monochrome environment for much longer. The divergent points. It's clearly sometime after the mass punishment killing made by the Middle in her hometown of District 25, where instead of being recruited by the damned dozen, she ended up in District 20, and somehow became under the employ of TCOR, where each employee, if they were to eat out, they ate out with those with the same pay grades, due to each moving at temporal rates of different kinds. Yes, they each move at different temporal rates. If any of them wanted to dine out with those at different temporal rates, they needed to eat at a restaurant which had DT4 protocol, and even then there are a variety of options to match different budgets, such as those that wanted to spend a little less by going to a restaurant without colour-restoring lamps, which were cheap by themselves. As for her job, she had quotas to meet, and there were different times when they needed to crack down on specific issues, such as unregistered inventions. There's also corruption within TCOR, certainly with the lower-ranked employees, as embezzlement is common with them, where they take the base rate of time tax and add a little more for their own personal use. The problem is that everyone knows about it and they don't want to dispute this, in case it results in additional time tax. The corruption runs deep. If this is more than just tolerated, then again, they're underpaid. Paid peanuts. So, you get monkeys in this case. Yes, peanuts being defined as if you pay them less, they'll find more than is needed, which is also used by each collection staff member in case of emergencies, such as when they need to accelerate their time for long enough to take care of those that are so against paying fines that they're willing to at least mug the collection staff member, and at most kill them. I wonder if Hubert is aware of this. Next, we have Deviate Association North, Section 3 Rodion. Now, Rodion saw that the interviewer was weirdly dedicated, hardly expecting her to follow her out there when it's so cold outside. The interviewer saw this as an extension of her duties as a professional, sniffing and shuddering with one hand tightly holding onto a notepad. They were in the back streets of the northern part of the city, a place of an unending blizzard. Even the poorest of those in the back streets wouldn't fall asleep outside. Carmen saw that Rodion, her colleagues and the interviewer were moving through the snow and the cutting wind. Rodion saw how popular the Deviates were, while the interviewer didn't really know how things were run there, and told her that most only know them as fixers who deliver expensive or rare items to anywhere. All other deliveries were usually handled by transportation companies or fixer offices. The interviewer saw this as a pretty dangerous job, asking why that association, if there were other options. Rodion simply answered that the pay was good. Carmen knows that she wasn't lying about that, but she deliberately omitted the fact that many fixers who were in heavy debt end up working for the Deviate Association. She didn't want to go into detail about her wilder past during the interview. Then Rodion noticed that the wind was subsiding, telling the others to take a quick break and get something to eat. They all sigh in exasperated unison before reaching out to open their delivery trunks. The interviewer was aware of the standard-issue Deviate Association courier trunk. Rodion saw it as a glorified delivery trunk, convenient when carrying a lot of stuff. The trunk warned of an unauthorized lock release outside of delivery coordinates. Rodion told it to be quiet. The interviewer noticed that it was AI activated. Carmen noted that as long as the AI wasn't able to pass for human, it wasn't illegal. A simple, minor assistant-level AI was often used. The one in the courier trunk was just one example of this. Rodion calls hers Polonista. The interviewer heard some witness reports of Deviant fixers talking to their trunks. Apparently they all thought that they went insane, partly due to the grueling treks that they made every day that might get to her eventually. Rodion was unaware of this. She sighed deeply as she pulled something out of her trunk. It was smaller than it had been at first, but when it emerged from the bag it grew larger and was revealed to be a palm-sized energy bar. The interviewer knew that they weren't any old containers. Rodion was unsurprised as it was able to store an item that's 5 times the size of the trunk inside, even if the item was hundreds of kilos. Once they're inside, they hardly feel the weight. The interviewer wrote down that the bag can bend space and the item's mass inside was barely felt. Rodion saw that they're complicated concepts. She read an article about Dicey South leaning a bit less on the technical side of things. The interviewer studied science and engineering in the north. It bleeds into her articles sometimes. Slightly amused by this, even her editor reprimands her for losing track of what she writes. Rodion offered an energy bar to the interviewer. Polonista warned that storage of unauthorized items is not recommended. The interviewer noted that he doesn't like that idea. Rodion told her not to worry about that. Deviant Association doesn't see it as an issue, especially if a mission takes them through the harsh environment like they're doing now. All that matters is that they make the delivery on time. Carmen saw that the interviewer noticed a dark tone in Rodion's voice. The interviewer asked her what happens if she doesn't make it in time. Rodion didn't like that question, asking if she keeps salting the wound, implying that it wouldn't be good for her if that happened. Thankfully, an aggressive sound of something rushing towards them pierced through the ambient noise. The interviewer knew what this meant, and Polonista confirmed this to mean hostile forces were detected. It activated Polonista high-power delivery mode maneuvers. Rodion was annoyed by thieves appearing now that the blizzard had lessened. She stuffed the remaining half of her energy bar into her mouth, jumped up and swung her delivery trunk over her shoulder. She ordered Polo to unlock Rapture Energy. This was authorized based on the thieves, wanting verification that there are no items near the exhaust. Rodion told it that only stuff that's risky for her if kept alive, such as the thieves. This resulted in a massive energy blade exploding out of one end of the trunk. She did not hesitate to swing this at her enemies. This interested the interviewer. Rodion asked if she's sure that she's safe out there. Wasn't she scared? This wasn't the first time that the interviewer had seen this kind of thing. Yes. Not the first time she's seen this kind of thing. Rodion saw this as a hard life. The interviewer added that her interview subjects were all very strong, so she had nothing to worry about. Why would this day be any different? Carmen knew that the interview was just saying that what she had to, in order to get the answers that she wanted. Rodion was onto her, seeing this as an attempt to butter her up. During this battle, she decided to let the interviewer in on some more info, saying this as she swung her trunk around at her enemies, explaining the functionalities of the courier trunk that wasn't already explained. Rodion implied that they cut it close often, around when they're about to be late for a delivery. Where the closer they are to being late for the delivery, the more that their strength was enhanced, as being late was dangerous, so she needed to get the delivery done quickly. The interviewer asked why was it dangerous to be late. Rodion told the interviewer that she didn't want to get on the boss's bad side. The interviewer understood. Carmen knew that Rodion was lying. The closer she was to being late, the more energy was expelled by the trunk. It intensifies until it starts to harm the user, and eventually the only thing that would be left is the trunk. Rodion continued to lie and asked if she thought that it was more to it than that. They're all motivated by their aversion to getting reprimanded by their bosses. Carmen understood that Rodion didn't want to share that detail because this would reveal how many users that her Polonista had in the past, or how she might be joining the ever-growing list of its former users. The interviewer would catch on to this and write this in her reports, simply based on the anxiety if this was picked up. Rodion would prefer not to make the Deviat Association look bad, if she could. Clearly her divergence point must be sometime after the mass punishment killing of those in her hometown in District 25 by the Middle. Although in this universe, she clearly didn't go as far from home as other Rodions, considering that she's had a wilder past that led her to being in debt. So either she entered into a scam that bit her in the someone was cheating at gambling in District 10, or she sucked at gambling in this universe. Well, she either didn't go too far from District 25, or went to District 10 and then went straight back to the north. Well, anything else I can't think of right now. But the Deviat, from what she's saying, is a high-risk, high-reward option for those wanting to pay their debts. That doesn't involve slave labour. The high risk comes from the courier trunks, which, while it's convenient in delivering items that are heavy, if in their normal size, it builds up energy that, while it enhances the wielder of it, which is utilised as a rupture blade, it's unclear if the blade is shrouded in energy or if it's like a lightsaber. But the enhancing energy, while its effects grow stronger, the closer to the delivery date and time, it's also potentially damaging, and likely if the courier is late, it kills them, leaving nothing left but the trunk. The courier trunk is likely similar to the dimensional storage bag that Ezra used to store her weapons, but is more sophisticated and has built-in weapons. Clearly, the alternatives are worse. If this is considered worth the risk, as some fates are worse than death, at least the trunk would kill them and get it over with. Since Rodion has got to Section 3, she's clearly done well in this association. As for less valuable or rare packages, fixer offices that are affiliated with the Deviat Association likely deal with that, along with other delivery companies that are less militant. Notable fixers from the Deviat Association are the Red Sack and Reindeer Man. Yes, the Red Sack and the Reindeer Man who delivered their packages regardless of the terrain. Yes, a festively themed version of Batman and Robin. As for Polonista, that's translated as Lady Midday, Noon Wraith or Noon Witch, considered a noon demon in Slavic mythology. She's said to be present in the middle of hot summer days in the form of whirling dust clouds carrying farming tools, asking difficult questions, and if whoever encounters her fails to answer said question or tries to get out of it, she'll either cut off their head or inflict a disease on them, taking a variety of forms, and was a means of scaring children away from valuable crops. The personification of sunstroke, although in parts of northern Russia she wielded a frying pan to either block the eye from the sun or scorch it. She apparently loves dancing, forcing girls to dance until the start of the evening. And if that girl was a better dancer, she'd reward them. Well, that's Gregor and Rodion's Identities for Season 4 covered, along with the summary of Heathcliff's background story. Until next time, hail the rabbit!